The judge looked at my mother's lawyer over the top of her glasses and said, very quietly, "Counsel, can you explain to this court the legal basis by which your clients believe they have standing to contest this will?" There was a pause. A long one. I was 31 years old. I was wearing a blazer I had ironed the night before at my kitchen table because I was too nervous to sleep, and I was sitting at the respondent's table alone, no lawyer beside me, a yellow legal pad in front of me with 7 pages of handwritten notes. My hands were not shaking. I want to be clear about that. My hands were completely still. The lawyer, a man in his 50s with a very expensive watch and a very thin file, said something about equitable claims and unjust enrichment. The judge wrote something down. She didn't look impressed. I thought about a Tuesday afternoon in October, 23 years earlier, when I was 8 years old and my father carried my backpack into a Greyhound station in Sudbury and set it down on the floor beside a row of orange plastic chairs. He told me to wait there. He said he and my mother were going to get tickets and they'd be right back. They did not come right back. I need to tell you what happened before that, or none of the rest of it makes any sense. My parents were not cruel people in obvious ways. They didn't shout. They kept the house clean. There were groceries. I went to school and cleaned clothes with my hair brushed. But there was my brother. My younger brother, 4 years younger than me, born with a kind of brightness that made rooms feel warmer. And there was me, and the difference in how they looked at us was something I understood before I had language for it. I don't know why. I've stopped trying to figure out why. Some questions don't have answers that would help you even if you got them. What I know is that the fall I turned 8, things got harder. My father had lost his job at the mill in the spring. My mother had picked up extra shifts at the diner, but it wasn't enough. And the apartment felt smaller with the two of them home together all day. Tight was something I couldn't name. I stayed out of the way. I got good at staying out of the way. I got good at staying out of the way. In October, they told me we were going on a trip. They said we were going to visit someone. I packed my backpack with my library book, my notebook, a change of clothes, and a stuffed rabbit I'd had since I was 3. His ear was almost completely detached. I had been meaning to ask my mother to sew it back on. We drove 2 hours north. We stopped at a Greyhound station. My father carried my backpack inside and set it down by the orange chairs and told me to wait. I waited for 4 hours. A woman who worked at the snack counter eventually asked me if I was okay. I told her my parents were getting tickets. She asked how long they'd been gone. I didn't want to answer. She sat down next to me anyway and asked me my name and my address, and if I knew my parents' phone number, and I gave her all 3 because I did know them. I had known them since I was 5. The way you memorize things when you somehow sense you might need them. She called the police. 2 officers came. They took down everything I told them. My full name, my parents' names, our address in Timmins, the phone number. One of them went to make a call and came back looking like something had shifted behind his eyes. He didn't tell me what. He gave me a granola bar from his jacket pocket and said everything was going to be fine. I still don't know if he believed that when he said it. Child Services came. A woman named, I'll call her my caseworker, because that's what she was, drove me to a group home in a minivan that smelled like pine air freshener, and I fell asleep in the backseat with my backpack on my lap and the rabbit tucked against my side. His loose ear flopped down over my wrist like a small hand. My parents, I would learn much later, told the police I had wandered off, that I was prone to that they had searched the station and the surrounding area, and I had simply disappeared. By the time the police followed up on the address I had provided, my parents had already moved. Different city. They filed a missing child report 14 months after I was placed in foster care. Under Ontario's Insurance Act provisions for missing persons, after a defined period, they were eventually able to make a claim on a small life insurance policy. The amount was not enormous, but they took it. I want to be very precise about this part of the story, because it matters later. There is a difference between what is technically possible within a system and what is right. My parents understood the first thing. They did not concern themselves with the second. I was in 2 foster placements in the first year. The first family was fine, not warm, but adequate, and I understand now that fostering is hard, and they were doing their best. The second placement ended when they relocated for work. I was 9 years old and on my third placement when I met the man who changed everything. His name was Arthur. He was 61 years old, a retired high school biology teacher from North Bay who had never married and had no children, and he had started volunteering with a mentorship program that brought adults into the group home twice a month to do activities with the kids. The first time I met him, he was setting up a chessboard on the table in the common room, and I walked by and stopped, and he looked up and asked if I played. I said I didn't know how. He said he would teach me. He wasn't trying to impress me. He wasn't performing patience. He just moved the pieces around and explained what each one did, twice, without any indication that explaining things twice was unusual or burdensome. He told me the pawns were like ordinary people who could surprise you if you let them. I thought that was interesting. I lost 3 times that afternoon. He won without making it feel like winning. He came back the next session and the one after that. He brought a small wooden chess set that folded closed with a brass latch and fit in his jacket pocket. We played at the table in the common room while other kids watched TV or did crafts. We didn't talk much. We played chess. The third month, he asked my caseworker if he could take me for a day trip to the Science Museum in Sudbury. She said yes after doing the appropriate background checks. We spent 4 hours looking at exhibits about ecosystems and planetary geology, and he answered every question I had and asked me questions back, and didn't talk down to me once. In the car on the way back, I fell asleep. When I woke up, we were in the parking lot of the group home, and he had turned the engine off and was reading a paperback and waiting for me to wake up rather than rousing me. I don't know why that detail has stayed with me for over 20 years. It just has. He began the process to become a licensed foster parent 4 months after we met. It took almost a year. There were home studies and interviews and training requirements and a lot of paperwork, and he did all of it without, as far as I ever knew, complaining to anyone about any of it. I moved into his house on a Wednesday afternoon in March. It was a small bungalow on a quiet street with a big backyard and a vegetable garden that wasn't doing much yet because it was still too cold. He had set up a bedroom for me with a quilt his mother had made, blue and green squares, very soft, and a lamp on the nightstand that had a stained glass shade with dragonflies on it. He said his mother had made the quilt and the lamp had belonged to his sister, and if I didn't like them, he could get different things. I said I liked them very much. I did like them very much. That night he made pasta and we played chess after dinner, and he let me choose what to watch on TV before bed, and I chose a nature documentary about migratory birds, and he watched the whole thing with me without checking his phone. I want to tell you what it felt like to live in that house. It felt like breathing out after years of not knowing you were holding your breath. He was not a demonstrative person. He did not say, "I love you" often or effusively. But he showed up to every parent-teacher interview and every school event. He drove me to the library every Saturday morning and waited in the car with his book until I was done. When I was 12 and having a terrible year, the way being 12 is sometimes a terrible year, he sat with me at the kitchen table and said, "I know it's hard right now. I also know you are going to be fine. I've been watching you for 3 years and I can tell." He said it the way he said things, plainly, like a fact, not a comfort. It was more comforting because of that. He formally adopted me when I was 13. He was 65. When I was 16, his doctor found something on a scan that turned out to be nothing, and I remember sitting in the car outside the clinic after the all-clear appointment and both of us being very quiet, and then him saying, "Well, that was a lot of fuss about nothing," and me laughing until my eyes watered. He patted my shoulder once, efficiently, and started the car. I went to Laurentian for environmental science. He drove me and helped carry boxes and bought me a kettle from my room and hugged me goodbye in the parking lot, which was only the second time I remember him initiating a hug in all the years I had known him. He said, "Phone when you get settled." I phoned that evening. We talked for 40 minutes about a documentary series about coral reefs. I came home every holiday. I planted things in his vegetable garden in the summers and learned to make his mother's pasta sauce from a recipe card written in her handwriting that he kept in a drawer in the kitchen. I graduated and got a job with an environmental consulting firm in Sudbury. I bought a small condo 20 minutes from his house. He was 73 and I was 26 when his health started to shift in ways that weren't reversible. Not sudden. Gradual, the way those things are. I drove him to appointments. I made sure the prescriptions were filled. I started coming for dinner 3 nights a week instead of 1. He never once said that any of this was a burden on me. He also never pretended he didn't need the help. There was something in that, in being needed without being made to feel obligated, that I only understood after he was gone. He died on a Saturday morning in April at home, which was what he had wanted. I was there. He left me everything. The house, the savings, the investments he had made carefully over a lifetime of modest living and not spending money on things he didn't need, the chess set with the brass latch, the quilt, the lamp. I already knew about the lamp and the quilt and the chess set because he had told me. The financial total, and I did not know the full number until the estate was settled, was $2.7 million. The house was worth a significant portion of that in a market that had moved considerably since he bought it. The rest was in registered accounts and conservative investments. I sat in the office of his estate lawyer, a woman who had known him for 20 years and clearly respected him very much. And she slid the documents across the desk, and I read them. And I thought about the pasta and the chess set and the Saturday library trips and the nature documentary about migratory birds. I thought about the quilt, which was folded at the foot of my bed at home. I thought about the lamp, which I had moved to my condo when I moved out because he said it suited me better than it suited him. I said he didn't have to do this. She said he wanted to. I drove home and sat on my couch for a long time. 8 months after Arthur died, my parents found me. I don't know how, exactly. Social media, probably, or some combination of public records. I had not made any effort to hide my life. It had genuinely not occurred to me that I needed to. I came home from work on a Thursday evening to find a letter in my mailbox from a law firm in Barrie. I opened it in my kitchen. I read it standing up because I had not yet sat down. My biological parents were initiating a civil claim against the estate against me, specifically as the sole beneficiary, under several theories including unjust enrichment and what their lawyer was characterizing as a constructive trust argument. The amount they were seeking was $2.7 million. All of it. I read the letter twice. Then I sat down on the kitchen floor, which is something I had not done since I was a child, and I stayed there for a while. I want to be honest about what I felt. The first thing was not anger. The first thing was something older and stranger, a feeling like being 9 years old again, standing in an orange-walled bus station, trying to understand something that did not make sense. The second thing, arriving a few minutes behind the first, was a cold, clear fury. Not hot. Cold. I called a lawyer. She listened to the whole letter and then was quiet for a moment and said, "Their standing here is going to be a significant problem for them." She explained, "My parents had voluntarily relinquished their parental rights when I was adopted at 13. They had received an insurance payout by representing me as a missing person while I was living in the provincial foster care system under my full legal name, something that raised, to put it mildly, a separate set of legal questions. And the bequest was from a man who had no legal or financial relationship with my biological parents whatsoever, who had met me after they had already abandoned me, and who had chosen freely to leave his estate to me as his adopted daughter. They have almost no case," she said. "That doesn't always stop people from filing. I thought about it for 2 weeks. I thought about it while I drove to work and while I watered the plant on my windowsill and while I sat in Arthur's, my backyard on weekend afternoons. I thought about what he would say. He would have said something plain and factual, probably. He would have moved a chess piece and waited for me to see it. Then I called the lawyer back and told her I wanted to handle the court appearance myself, with her available for preparation and advice. She said, "That's unusual." I said I knew. She said, "It's your right." I said I knew that too. I spent 6 weeks preparing. I read case law until my eyes ached. I organized my documents into a binder with labeled tabs. I practiced out loud in my kitchen, standing at the counter, which felt extremely strange, and then less strange, and then almost normal. The lawyer reviewed my notes and corrected 2 things and said the rest was solid. I pressed my blazer the night before. I could not sleep. I made tea and sat at the kitchen table with Arthur's chess set in front of me. I had taken it out of the case for the first time since he died, and I arranged the pieces and looked at them for a while. The pawns. Like ordinary people who could surprise you if you let them. The courtroom was smaller than I had expected. My parents were at the other table. I had not seen them in 23 years. They looked older, which is obvious but still strange to absorb. My mother's hair was dyed. My father had gained weight. Neither of them looked at me directly. Their lawyer, the one with the expensive watch, was shuffling papers and looking, I thought, somewhat less confident than he had probably looked that morning. The judge was a woman in her early 60s with reading glasses and an expression that gave very little away. The lawyer presented their case. The thrust of it was, as my lawyer had predicted, largely incoherent, a blend of emotional arguments about family bonds and some creative stretching of equitable trust doctrine that didn't quite hold its shape under examination. Then it was my turn. I stood up and I introduced myself and I said I would like to address the question of standing first because I believed it was dispositive. I explained that my parents had voluntarily signed documents relinquishing all parental rights in 2010, at which time I was legally adopted by Arthur. I provided the documents. I noted that under Ontario law, once parental rights are fully and voluntarily relinquished and a legal adoption is completed, the biological parents have no recognized claim in law to the adoptee's estate, inheritance, or assets. I explained that the bequest in question came from my adoptive father, who had no relationship of any kind with my biological parents, who had chosen freely to include me in his will, and who had done so in full legal capacity with proper documentation. I also said, and I kept my voice very level when I said this, that I was aware my parents had received an insurance payout by filing a missing persons claim while I was in the provincial system under my full legal name, and that I was not raising that matter in these proceedings, but that I wanted it on the record that I was aware of it. The judge looked at me for a moment. Then she looked at the other lawyer. She said, "Counsel, can you explain to this court the legal basis by which your clients believe they have standing to contest this will?" The pause was long. He said something about equitable claims. She wrote something down. She ruled from the bench. The claim was dismissed for lack of standing. She did not mince the words. My parents' lawyer said something about appeal rights. The judge said he was welcome to pursue that avenue and wished him good luck, in a tone that did not sound particularly like well-wishing. I gathered my documents into my binder. I put the binder in my bag. I stood up and I walked out of the courtroom into a hallway with fluorescent lights and a water fountain and a bulletin board covered in legal aid notices, and I stood there for a moment by myself, and I breathed out. I thought, Arthur would have found this whole situation completely baffling. He would have said, "I don't understand what they thought was going to happen," not unkindly, just genuinely. He had a hard time understanding people who made decisions that didn't follow logically from their circumstances. I understood it, I think. I think they had always seen me as something that belonged to them even when they wanted nothing to do with me, an asset to be claimed when it became worth claiming. I don't say that with bitterness anymore. It's just a fact about who they were. I drove home and changed out of my blazer and put the kettle on. I called my closest friend, someone I had met in first year at Laurentian and kept ever since, and told her the whole thing. She said, "Are you kidding me?" approximately 4 times. I told her I was not kidding her. She said, "I'll bring dinner." She brought Thai food, and we sat at my kitchen table and talked for 3 hours. Before I went to sleep that night, I sat for a few minutes in the chair by the window where I keep the lamp. The dragonfly shade? The light it throws is amber and green, and slightly unreal, and I have loved it since I was 9 years old and first saw it on the nightstand in the room Arthur made for me. I thought about what he said about the pawns. ordinary people who can surprise you. In the spring, I applied to establish a small charitable fund in his name through the Sudbury Community Foundation, the Arthur Bouchard Fund for Youth in Care. Not a large fund. I'm not wealthy in a way that changes my daily life dramatically, but enough to provide some small supports, transportation, activity fees, school supplies for kids in the foster system in the region where I grew up, where he found me. The first year, 11 kids received support through the fund. I got a letter from a caseworker saying that one of the kids had used the transportation money to get to a chess club at the library every Saturday for 4 months. I think about that a lot. I still have the chess set. I still have the quilt folded at the foot of my bed. I still have the lamp. Some mornings, when the light comes through the dragonfly shade and falls across the floor in patches of amber and green, I think, this is what staying looks like. Not a grand gesture. Not a dramatic declaration. Just a man who sat down in the chair next to mine and said he would teach me, and then did, and then kept showing up. That's what I got. That's what I got. That's what I kept. That's what no one can take.